Good morning and welcome to Rising Fridays. In case you were unaware of what day of the week it is, we've got you covered here at Rising Fridays, and we have a fantastic show for you today. As you can imagine, it's been a busy week, and next week will be busy as well. Ryan is still in recovery mode today, so he's remote again. How are you feeling, Ryan?
Almost all the way better. It's been a ride, but looking forward to being back there next week. That's I'll put it that way.
It sounds good. Well, I'm looking forward to that too. Today, we're going to dig into Amazon labor union leader Chris Small's testimony on Capitol Hill yesterday. We're also going to break down, of course, the New York Times massive piece on Tucker Carlson. We're going to talk to Nina Turner about what's next for her and the progressive movement after her loss to Shontel Brown for Ohio's 11th congressional district. But first, Ryan, we have to talk about the aftermath of the abortion memo leak. We're going to spend a decent amount of time on that today, actually, because it was such a bombshell. Before we transition into our first guest, who I think will be able to provide some great insights from the right on this, how did you react, Ryan, when you saw the Politico report of Justice Alito's opinion, majority opinion, a draft from February that said the Supreme Court, or indicated the Supreme Court was poised to overturn Roe V Wade, which was then authenticated by Chief Justice Roberts?
Well, I thought that they would overturn Roe v. Wade because they actually already basically did overturn Roe v. Wade by allowing the Texas law, which was in complete violation of Roe v. Wade, to go into effect. But I thought what they would do is in June issue some kind of mealy-mouthed opinion that in effect overturned Roe and Casey, but didn't come out and say so that you could continue to have what we've had for the last few months, which is this insistence among a lot of abortion rights advocates that Roe has been gutted, but the kind of people who want to gut Roe saying no, it hasn't. Actually, relax. There's nothing to see here, nothing to worry about, and they would use that process to allow all of these states then to go forward with their own restrictions. So I was wrong about that. Instead, Alito apparently has 4 votes plus his 5th vote for a full-throated kind of renunciation of the last 50 years, of the last maybe 150 years of progress post, or maybe you can go back to the New Deal when we started kind of forming a new country, a new society that moves forward progressively. Maybe go back to TR, and he just says it's done. We're overturning it. We're going back to what it was before, and any state that wants to ban it can just do whatever they want. That's how common law did it back in England in the 1600s. That's how we're going to do it now, and just not mincing words. I was surprised that they felt the kind of impunity to go that far. What was your reaction to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 layers here. The fact that it leaked, I actually don't think that's just sort of traditionalist nonsense. I think that is actually very serious, and I think it's sort of always going to psychologically haunt justices as they're making their opinions. They are supposed to be sort of the one branch that is separate from the whims of public opinion and the pressures that public opinion can create, so that's alarming. And the opinion itself was full-throated in a way that I'm on the other side of this debate, on the other side of the Roe debate, on the other side of the abortion question. I thought it was very, very heartening, and surprisingly so, although perhaps not surprising from Justice Alito. And actually on that question, we're interviewing people on both sides of the Roe question today. We're interviewing people on both sides of the abortion debate, and we're lucky to have somebody who is going to provide us some insight from the right and from the pro-life movement. And I want to introduce now Vice President of Communications of the Susan B. Anthony List, Mallory Carroll, is here with us right now to discuss. Mallory, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much.
So actually, I want to start off by asking you for your reaction to Justice Alito's opinion. What I've seen on the right has been a lot of satisfaction with the way Justice Alito wrote out this opinion. As Ryan said, there was sort of perhaps a possibility it could have been mealy-mouthed. It could have been, it could have been vague in different ways. And yet what we got was sort of a very fire-breathing anti-Roe opinion that countered what was actually written in Roe in many ways. So Mallory, what were you guys thinking over at SBA List?
Yeah, well, we were very encouraged by the draft. It's just a draft. We're hopeful that the final opinion will resemble this very much, perhaps with an additional vote from the chief. But I think that it behooves the justices to be clear on this point because they chose to take up this Mississippi Dobbs case, but there are dozens of abortion cases that are going through the lower courts right now on discrimination abortion bans, on more regulations for health and safety standards for abortion facilities. And so the lower courts need guidance. I think that if it's anything less than this full-throated, very clear repudiation of Roe, that it really would just kick the can down the road, and the justices would have to deal with this perhaps next year, next term, because there's just such a momentum of abortion litigation that's been making its way up through the courts for the last 10 years or more.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and Mallory, I have my own ideas about where this anti-abortion movement has come from over the last 50 years. Emily and I have talked about it before. We'll talk about it again later in the show. But I kind of want to ask you from your perspective, just a basic question that I don't quite understand. Even though I understand, I think the structural, historical, and movement-based reasons that there's such a push to ban abortion, what I still can't quite get my head around is why. Like, why? Like, I understand why people would have their own individual opinions about abortion, but I don't understand why the necessity of forcing that on the rest of the country and forcing somebody that you don't even know to go through childbirth. Like, so help me just understand that.
Yeah, it really depends on what your understanding is of what's happening inside the womb during pregnancy. Is that a human life or is it not? If it's not a human life, if it's if it's the equivalent of your appendix, a tooth that needs pulling, then there's no reason for us to be doing what it is that we're doing, right? But this is a second human being with rights, we believe, that deserves equal protection under the law. This is a human rights battle. And that is what has driven this movement since Roe versus Wade to seek protection for the most vulnerable. They have no other voice but ours. They're unseen, unheard, but they're an entire constituency, 50 million lives lost since Roe versus Wade. So if you believe, as I do, and as science teaches us, that there is a unique human being from the moment of conception, then you want to fight for those lives.
And Ryan and I are... Yeah. Go ahead, Ryan.
No, I mean, I totally understand that a lot of people believe that, and a lot of people, their faith teaches them that. There are other faiths, the Jewish faith, for instance, which believes that abortion is fundamental. It's part of religious freedom to people in the Jewish faith. They wrote different amicus briefs, even the conservative branch and others, saying that this is a violation of our religious freedom. And so, like I said, I understand why you could believe that. Why strip religious freedom away from, in this case, the Jewish people?
It's not really a question of religious belief. My religious beliefs are sincerely held, but they really have nothing to do with my position. This is a scientific reality that we are more aware of since 1973 than ever before. What is going on inside the womb, the life of this unborn child that's growing, the heart beating, as early as 5 weeks, and the ability of the child to feel pain as at least by 15 weeks, which is the point in question. And I think it's important to remember that this question that you're asking me would be more relevant if we were talking about banning all abortion. But what's at question here with Roe versus Wade, what Roe versus Wade and subsequent abortion jurisprudence from the court has allowed is abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. paid for by taxpayers. It is a very extreme position that our country is in. We're one of 7 countries worldwide. We're an international outlier. 47 out of 50 European countries limit abortion at 15 weeks, if not earlier. So what we are hoping as a pro-life movement, the reason we've been looking towards this moment with the court, is to see the Supreme Court take their thumb off the scale and allow the American people through their legislators to enact laws that reflect their values. And their values are largely not, our values are largely not the current status quo, which is what Democrats are hoping to further enshrine, regardless of what happens with the court. We've got another vote coming up next week on the Women's Health Protection Act. To regardless of what happens in the court, enshrine abortion on demand up into the moment of birth, performed by non-doctors with as little regulation as possible, and to prevent at all the states from acting on the will of the people to limit this in any way. So it's a radical one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't work for our nation. We need to be able to use the tools of democracy to debate and find consensus, and other people can feel free to weigh in on this debate. People for whom this is a religious argument. I've seen non-religious people, candidates in Pennsylvania and Arizona and elsewhere, call abortion sacred. I don't think they're quoting any particular religious doctrine. It's just deeply held to them. So this is what's at stake. People have to understand how extreme our nation is when it comes to abortion policy. We just want to be able to modernize our law, move it back, and to have a robust debate about what's going on in the womb. People need to know. And the nation is increasingly pro-life, I think, because of these advances in science and medicine that have allowed us to know what's going on inside the womb.
So Ryan and I are going to get into this a little bit later in the show, but Ryan is openly on the left, I'm openly on the right, and you went on ABC this week and talked to Terry Moran and had a really interesting exchange with Terry, who pushed you on the question of prosecuting women, prosecuting mothers who, in a post-Roe world, have an abortion and state laws create a problem for them and treat them as, murderers, basically, prosecute them as though they were involved in a murder. And it was interesting to watch because Terry Moran seemed to have a very clear sort of perspective that he was happy to air. And I actually think the question, though, is fair of, how if you sincerely believe this is proven by science to be a life and thus it is a taking of a life, defending that as you did on air, I think is really important. And I know it's difficult. So I guess I just wanted to ask you about it. As this week unfolded, you guys were everywhere at SBA list, much to the chagrin of some people on the left who don't even think you should be interviewed. How have you interpreted the media reaction this week? And what do you think the danger is of some of those networks just not talking to pro-life people anymore and just hosting one side of the debate?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It seems to me over the last week that the Washington Post and the New York Times in particular, every single reporter is now on the abortion beat. I've talked to more people that individual reporters. They seem to be all writing the same story. I've never talked to them before. I'm hoping that these stories come out well. I'm glad that they're asking for a pro-life perspective. But when it comes to the major TV networks, I'm not sure who else from the pro-life side was on CNN or ABC. It's hard to view all of the coverage while you're also trying in this moment to respond. But I do think that on the ABC interview that Mr. Moran's bias was really on display and that anyone can see that. I think journalists are called to be objective and to be as calm as possible when discussing these issues. And he completely betrayed that. I think he was frustrated that I had corrected him a few times earlier in the interview on the reality of abortion in America, the fact that there are late-term abortions happening well past the point that a child is viable, especially here in Washington, D.C., for example, and the fact that the Democratic Party position has not been safe, legal, and rare for a long time now. So I think people need to hear both sides. It's been interesting watching the reaction to the ABC interview, and later this week I had been on CNN to see the comments and some on Twitter, which is not necessarily real life. But I do think that there's the role of the media is so important in how this leak is covered and how the eventual decision is covered, because there's really two narratives that you can sort of see emerging. The first is that abortion is going to be illegal overnight if this ends up being the final opinion, which is simply not true. And the second is the reality, which is this returns the right of the people to make policy decisions through their elected representatives, and those policy decisions can change based on consensus ebbing and flowing, and on political engagement from the voters. If you don't like a law that someone passes, you can work to unelect them. So, and really this focus on the tools of democracy rather than just a blanket fear-mongering position that this ends abortion overnight, which just simply isn't the case, and that's the media's responsibility, is to report this accurately.
Mm-hmm. We probably have to run pretty soon, but can I get you quickly to respond to the Poland situation? I'm sure you're very familiar with it. Poland, for viewers, over the last several years, restricted abortion rights quite significantly. Since then, there have been massive protests because 2 women with ectopic pregnancies died because the hospitals believed that the law barred them from performing abortions, even though the fetuses had died within their wombs. The government later said, no, in this case, it would have been okay. But when you set up a situation where a procedure is criminalized, we know how institutions operate. We know how people operate. They're going to say, oh, well, this might be criminal, so I'm just going to hope for the best for this woman. And both of these young women in their 20s, I believe, that both of them died. And so now they're re-looking at this. Do you believe that this is a kind of final victory that you guys have won? Or are you going to push it? Is the movement going to push it further? Or do you think that it's going to kill women as people in doctors in hospitals, decline to perform abortions of ectopic pregnancies, a fetus that dies in the tube, and the result of people dying is going to then create a backlash? What's your read on how the Poland situation compares to here?
Yeah, we're very concerned as a movement about the well-being of women and children, and the situations that you mentioned are tragic. I think we need to look to the states that have started to enact, even before this decision, strong pro-life protections. There are always exceptions for situations where the life and health of the mother are at risk. In the cases of these ectopic pregnancies, going in and removing that unborn child is not an abortion. That is saving the life of the mother when this is not the life of the child is lost at that point because of the circumstances of where the baby has implanted. And I'm very concerned as we sort of observe this unfold here in the United States about the increase in chemical abortion and the fact that there may be women with ectopic pregnancies who are being given chemical abortion drugs, which will not resolve an ectopic pregnancy, and then going into emergency rooms without knowing, without the doctors knowing exactly what's going on. There's a very disturbing expansion of chemical abortion drugs that's happening right now across America. I absolutely do not support, doctors denying healthcare to women when in circumstances like there were in Poland. That's simply not what this movement is about. And I think if you look at the state legislation that's on the books, that hopefully will be reenacted after a final decision is issued from the court. And if you look at some of the legislation that states are advocating for now, they're always including these exceptions for the life and health of the mother.
Sure. Well, Mallory, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and being willing to answer these questions.
Thank you so much. Have a great Friday.
Of course. Thanks, Mallory. Constructive conversation. And of course, we will be talking to somebody who is a leader in the pro-choice movement as well. So we'll have this conversation will continue throughout the episode today. But for now, we're going to tell you what is on our radars right after this.